We continue to follow breaking news out of Joe Daviess County, Illinois. A train derailment this afternoon. The BNSF railway train derailed 105 cars, 103 carrying crude oil.
Yeah, this happened in a rural area south of Galena. And look at this. This is one of the explosions we caught on tape. We do have a crew on the scene gathering more information. We'll be posting that via Twitter and on our website as well as Facebook until our latest newscast with our updates on this coming up tonight at 6.
We begin with breaking news at 5. A train derailment in Joe Daviess County, Illinois, with cars carrying oil. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon DeRick.
I'm Garrett Mativier. This video you're looking at right now just into our newsroom from our crews on the scene. A huge blast right there. Fire and black plumes of smoke rising from all this. Mark Stevens is there right now. He joins us live on the phone. And Mark, what can you tell us at this point very early on here?
Well, Gary, looking at that video, we were talking with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which was trying to get up to that scene to respond. They were actually told to stay away because of the fire and explosion hazard. And what you saw, most likely, as we were told at the time, one tank car was on fire, but there was another one on top of it. And when that sort of explosion of fire happened, my guess is that that's when that second tank car really caught and the tank car would have ruptured. That's typically what you see with these fires. Now, we are not sure how many tank cars have derailed. We were told there's conflicting reports hovering between 5 and 6. We do know BNSF, the railroad company, which was hauling the oil, confirmed that this train was hauling 103 oil tank cars and that they did have a derailment about 1:20 this afternoon. Now, where we were at was across the river. Where it's derailed is a very remote area. It's basically where the Galena River meets the Mississippi River, and the rail line runs along the shore there. Now, we've done stories in the past where we've talked to emergency responders, and their big concern is the lack of access. We were looking at an aerial map. There really are no roads there, so it's very difficult to get fire crews there. Now, my U.S. Fish and Wildlife source did tell me that before we saw that large explosion, that all the fire crews had been pulled away from that scene because of the hazard, and that's what we kind of know at this point.
Okay, Mark, a couple questions for you here. Just to set the scene for the folks at home, this is south of Galena in Illinois, north of Bellevue in Iowa. The video you are seeing shot from north of Bellevue from the Iowa side of the river, actually the best vantage point of this at this point. And of course now, Mark, the big question, what about the water? We talked here locally with Iowa American Water, and they have indicated that they have not been identified yet. What are your sources saying about the concerns of potential oil spill into the Mississippi River?
Well, there's probably a good thing with the oil. Oil will float on water, and we are, at this point, it's so far above any of the Quad Cities water intakes. The drinking water suppliers would be paying attention to it, but they wouldn't have to be in panic mode at this current point in time. There is boom in the area. We don't know how much. The Dubuque Fire Department has access to the spill containment boom that you'd see. It may not be needed. There's a lot of ice on the river, and it was hard to tell from the aerial photograph just how close the rail line is to the actual water. There are some stretches where it's 10, 20, 30 feet. There's some stretches where it's right along the shore. So we don't have that known for sure. But if there were oil spilling into the river, it would take some time for it to reach any of the water supplies down in the Quad Cities. And of course, up in this area, there are no water suppliers that use the river for drinking water.
And Mark, last question for you before we let you go gather some more details for us. You have done a lot of investigating for TV6 Investigations on just this type of situation. What are we expecting now? Who's coming to help, and what can we expect in terms of emergency crews getting to this very remote area and getting this fire out?
Well, we do know that there are hazmat crews from around the area. One of my sources actually comes from Wisconsin. They have a 3-county area hazmat zone, so they're on scene. So you're going to have fire departments, you're going to have the hazmat crews. The railroad would also have spill contractors and emergency crews themselves. When we last did a story on this, the railroad told us that according to one of their own maps, they had fire equipment in Galesburg and in Chicago. Those were the nearest spots we could find. Of course, those are some lengthy drives away from the situation. The Coast Guard will be coming onto scene because if there is any oil spilled into the river, that's, of course, their jurisdiction. And eventually EPA will also come here, depending on the spill, to basically create an incident command where there'll be someone who's in charge of gathering all this information. The first concern will be trying to figure out, do you let the fire burn itself out? How do you get the fire out? Because that's the main concern. With this oil being as hazardous as this, it's flammable, it's the explosion hazard that's of imminent concern, followed second by any pollution to the river.
All right, Mark. And again, when we check back in with you later in the newscast, we do know this is a remote location. We don't believe there are many homes in this area.
We are covering breaking news tonight, a train derailment in Galena. Thanks for being here with us. I'm Paula Sands.
And I'm Gary Bativier. Let's get the latest right now as you look at that explosion behind us. KWQC's Mark Stevens is live on the scene with the very latest for us right now. Mark?
Gary, we're at the incident command location, which is not accident, but what you can see the plume of smoke from the still burning fire from that oil train. Now here at Incident Command, we've got all kinds of people here. There were 7 fire departments here earlier. Now we've got state police, we've got hazmat crews, the railroad is here, all kinds of environmental officials. We were told EPA is on its way from Chicago. The railroad is bringing in crews from Minneapolis as well as Chicago, all to respond to this train derailment and spill. Now we do have the city administrator of Galena here joining us, who's going to answer just a couple more questions for us. Mark, first, we know that there was derailment. How many cars actually derailed?
There were 8 cars derailed on a 7,000-foot long train, and 2 of those cars are believed to be on fire. We have seen a couple of explosions already.
We know that crews got pulled away from that because of the fire and explosion hazard, but it sounds like Galena was able to get there initially.
Yeah, our fire crews and local hazmat crews were on the scene. They began actually attempting to extinguish the fire on the one crude car. They were, just as they started, the flames really took off, the smoke took off. They immediately backed off the scene and got away to a safe distance.
Now we know from the aerial map that's a really remote area. I'm just curious, how did they get out there? Because there wasn't a direct road.
There actually is a railroad service road that they're able to access, as well as our Galena River bike trail took them right to the site.
Oh, how quickly were they able to get there once you guys got the call, do you know?
They were there within the first 45 minutes, I believe.
And then as far as any spill, we've covered a lot about worrying about chemicals and oil getting into the river in case of these kinds of accidents. What's the scene like? I know from the aerial map it looks like it's close to the backwaters, but it sounds like there's some land and stuff in there to kind of buffer that.
Yeah, the tracks are not right on the Mississippi River. There are backwaters with some islands. The photos I've seen of the scene do not show any cars that are on water. They're all on land, but I don't know the extent or whether there's any spillage or damage to the environment down there.
Got it. And obviously I didn't let you get into that meeting, but I'm curious, do we know what the efforts are going to be for the rest of this evening?
We are our first incident responders here, the fire department. They're communicating with the BNSF railroad officials. We're really on standby until we receive instruction from them, but it's very likely we'll not be back near the scene of the explosions tonight.
Got it. Thank you so much, Mark. That's Mark Moran, City Administrator for the City of Galena. Reporting live in Galena, Mark Stevens, KWQC TV 6 News.
All right, Mark, while we have you there, as we look at the image that we're seeing behind us here as well, this was taken from just north of Bellevue, Iowa, across the river. Of course, the situation where Mark is right now, just south of Galena in Illinois. And Mark, you've been on that scene now for a couple of hours. There's a lot of work going to go into this, as you mentioned, throughout the night tonight. And you also indicated a very remote area, no houses from what you have seen in that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. No houses. It is that remote area, but there is, as the city administrator told us, an access road, which we couldn't see from the map. So we know that BNSF is going to be bringing their environmental contractors and their equipment to get down there and to respond overnight and probably into tomorrow. The problem is they've got to wait really for the fire to burn out. You know, if you look at the U.S. DOT emergency response guide, whenever you have a tank car that has chemicals or things that are flammable, really the response is if you can get water on it, get it there unmanned, and then stay away about a half mile.
Hey, Mark, we're looking at some aerial footage right now that actually shows what looks to be a lot of trees on fire in that area, potentially, wow, as they pull out there, what a great shot, potentially as a result of that oil spilling into the fields there and into that heavily forested, if you will, area. We see there's a lot of bluffs in that region, too. That fire now could become something totally different. There is ice on the ground, which perhaps could keep the fire at bay, but Galena is a very small department. They must be calling on additional resources for the fire part alone.
Yeah, in fact, they had 7 different fire departments and hazmat departments come down earlier this afternoon. A lot of them have gone home when there was things that they couldn't do. The hazmats actually didn't need to do a whole lot because this turned into basically a fire scene. There wasn't anything leaking into the river. We do know from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they told us that they weren't aware of any oil that had gotten into the river, which makes sense given some of the topography in the area. Of course, if there is brush burning, once they get the fire out, typically the treatment for that will be scooping it up with excavators and landfilling that. That's pretty much all you can do to clean up a spill like that.
A dramatic scene, like something from a war zone. Fire and smoke billowing from a burning train.
Emergency crews rushing to the scene, a number of homes evacuated as we wait to find out the environmental impact.
TV6 was there as it all unfolded, bringing you constant updates from the scene. And tonight, the latest information. And that story tops your first 6 minutes tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gary Matibia.
And I'm Sharon DeRick. It all started this afternoon. A BNSF train derailed near Galena, Illinois. That is in Joe Daviess County. The incident happened near where the mouth of the Galena River meets the Mississippi. Multiple agencies were on scene. The train was carrying crude oil. KWQC's Mark Stevens has been on the scene all afternoon. He is still there tonight and joins us now live right now. And Mark, what's going on tonight?
Well, we're at the incident command where environmental and emergency crews are staging to go ahead and keep taking care of that incident. You can't see it right now, but you can see we know there are dozens of firefighters. There's big truck sucking equipment, all kinds of stuff. And where you can see the train accident happened about 3.5 miles south of town. Here's what it looked like earlier today. There were flames billowing into the air. 2 tank cars caught fire. The railroad says 5 tank cars derailed. The city says 16. There may be an issue in how they define a derailment there. And they evacuated 1 mile around that accident. There were 6 homes that were evacuated. Now, that was voluntary. Not everybody did do that. The Galena Fire Department was actually there on the scene. They were attacking the fire for a short time until they determined it was too dangerous to be there, and then they evacuated themselves. They actually left about $10,000 worth of equipment there, and that's when we saw probably the big plume of fire that you saw when we believe the 2nd tank car really caught fire. Now, those emergency crews have not been on the scene since then. We do know that the BNSF Railroad hazmat team is down there now. They are letting the fire burn itself out, but they're assessing the scene. They're trying to figure out how they're going to start cleaning up. We do not know yet how much oil, if any, actually spilled. We do know plenty of oil has been burning. Now, the mayor says this is something that has been of some concern for some time as more and more of these trains have traveled through the area in Joe Daviess and Carroll counties. Here's what he had to say at a press conference about a half hour ago.
So, you know, it is a great concern. People have, in the past, have brought this up to our attention for the closeness of the railroad tracks with our buildings and our public and our roadways down there.
Now, at one point, there were 7 fire departments here, 50 or 60 firefighters. A lot of those have gone home this evening. Now it's really just the railroad crews that are determining what the next appropriate response is, and they'll give us more information as we find out. The EPA is on its way, and there will be more determinations about how to treat any surrounding spill as we move forward. Reporting live in Galena, Mark Stevens, KWQC, TV6 News.
Flames shooting into the sky, smoke seen for miles after a train derails in northwestern Illinois. More than a day later, a fire still burning. And we have team coverage tonight. KWQC's James Stratton, Courtney Yoon, and Mark Stevens live with what crews on the scene are monitoring today, the safety concerns, and we talk with people living near the derailment site. Here's what we know right now. Of a 105-car train carrying mostly oil, 21 cars derailed yesterday afternoon. It happened just south of Galena in Joe Daviess County. Initially, 2 rail cars were burning, but the resulting fire has spread to up to 5 cars. KWQC's James Stratton joins us now live near the scene tonight. And James, what do we know about the situation right now?
Sharon, we're just outside the Central Command Center. That's over my left shoulder here on the Galena River. To my right, downstream, actually about 3.5 miles, is where the derailment site actually is. Now, there was a press conference this morning at Galena City Hall at 11 a.m. with the Illinois EPA, the United States EPA, Joe Daviess County Sheriff, BNSF, and the Galena Fire Department. Now, BNSF did confirm that the train was coming from the Bakken oil field in North Dakota, but wouldn't confirm where the train was heading. As you mentioned, 5 cars are now burning, and we now know as of 3 o'clock, crews have reignited the fire. All day they've been trying to cool it rather than put it out.
At this time, I think they're flowing mostly water. They do have a little bit of foam with it, but it's just kind of a cooling effort right now more than a put the fire out effort. We want to be able to see that where that product is instead of it being put out and having a chance of an explosion.
Now, they will eventually stop spraying water on the cars and let it controlled burn. There is a containment pond around the derailment site. If that overflows, it could run into the water and into the river. That is why they've decided to let it controllably burn. Both the Illinois EPA and the U.S. EPA are on scene, as I mentioned. They are monitoring real time and sending tests back to the lab. That could take up to 3 to 7 days. Currently, there is no threat to human health. Sharon, we're reporting live in Galena, downtown Galena, just outside the command post. James Stratton, KWQC, TV6 News.
And that derailment happened just south of Galena along a rural location. It is a remote wooded area. A precautionary evacuation within a mile radius was put into place. There are 6 homes within that evacuation area. KWQC's Courtney Yoon continues our team coverage. She joins us now live with why some people evacuated and others just chose not to.
Yeah, Sharon, we're about 3/4 of a mile from the derailment site here on a family farm in Galena. If you look through their pasture here just above that tree line, you can kind of see a little bit of smoke still coming from when their tanker cars are burning. We've been watching it all afternoon, and the smoke comes in intervals. At times, you can barely see it. Other times, it becomes heavier and darker. But compared to yesterday, the scene is much calmer here now. Here's what we saw yesterday. Giant clouds of black smoke and fire. The family that lives on this farm says they were driving home from town when they noticed it. Police came by to tell them about the voluntary evacuation. The fear was a propane tank near the railroad switch, and if it exploded, police said it might be best for homes nearby to evacuate. We talked with 2 families today, one who decided to stay, the other who decided to evacuate.
Because there's a bluff, we decided that we couldn't really hear the explosions before with the crude, so we decided to stay.
We were a little concerned about the black cloud. The wind started dying down in the afternoon, and we assumed that it would not be the best thing to be breathing it, so we decided to go ahead and evacuate for the evening.
Over an hour ago, state police came by all the homes nearby to let neighbors know that they're going to relight the tanker cars. The Joe Daviess County Sheriff says crews will stop spraying water on the cars, letting the oil spill out of the tanker, and continue to burn off in a controlled environment. Sandra Schultz, the woman we just talked to and the family that lives here on the farm, says they haven't decided yet if they will evacuate tonight. Live in Galena, Courtney Yoon, KWQC, TV6 News.
The American Red Cross is helping on the scene. Volunteers are providing water and meals to people living nearby, rail company crews, and emergency responders. Well, after the train derailment, our crews captured this video. Huge flames just shooting into the air. But the railroad company says the train's tank cars were a newer model that already meet a higher safety standard than what federal law requires. The newer model was designed during safety upgrades voluntarily adopted by the industry 4 years ago. And the improvements were meant to prevent cars from rupturing in the event of a derailment. But in the past year, in 3 other accidents, those types of cars have split open. KWQC's investigative reporter Mark Stevens has been following the story and is back on the scene to continue our team coverage. And Mark, you've looked into the precautions in place for trains carrying crude oil, and tonight you have more insight into railway safety.
Yes, the railroad was using DOT 111 tank cars, and those are the tank cars that have been called into question in recent years. Now, they were using that upgraded model. It's got a kind of a goofy designation number. The important thing to know is that when you were looking at these particular tank cars, imagine it's a can on its side, now rotate it and look at it from the front and the back, it would have a half-height shield on that. So what it means is there's extra steel on the front and on the end to prevent the couplers from puncturing that head shield and the head part of the tank. That's where those tank cars are most vulnerable. Now, the Association of American Railroads is actually pushing for stronger regulations on these tank cars because they say they can do better than what they are doing. Now, they're asking the federal government, the Department of Transportation, to require thicker steel, a thermal barrier for the tank, because when these cars crash and they're exposed to fire, those long fires allow the steel to actually rupture from heat, and that sends more oil or more ethanol or more flammable material onto the ground, causing more fire. Now, the AAR wants also full-height head shields, not just a half-height on the ends of those tank cars, to fully protect those vulnerable ends. The DOT has 3 options on the table, and that rule is headed to another part of the government to measure its costs. It recommends basically 3 options. In one of those options, it would take everything that the AAR wants, and then as they change down to option 2, option 3, they lose a couple of those details to make things cheaper. Now, it does mean that it's going to be difficult because some of those tank cars in service would eventually need to be serviced and retrofitted depending on the regulations that are adopted. So there are comments for and against that rule. Now, when we last investigated the number of oil trains coming through this area back in the summer, about 42 per week, every train I saw had tank cars fitted with these half-height head shields. So the oil shippers are using these newer cars, and some railroads actually charge shippers an extra fee if they're using the older style DOT 111 cars. Now, we don't know if BNSF was charging those extra fees for using those types of cars. That's something we were going to try and ask the spokesman this afternoon. But those tank cars are what's of main concern. Of course, we're also worried about the oil, what this crude oil has been used in these tank cars. We'll take a look at that tonight at 6. Reporting live in Galena, Mark Stevens, KWQC, TV6 News.
All right, Mark, good information. Fire and smoke from the site of a train derailment right here in the QCA. A second day of recovery coming with an end with many questions yet to be answered.
BNSF will address any environmental impacts this incident may have caused.
As we wait to find out exactly what that impact is, some area environmental groups are voicing concern over the path trains like this take on a daily basis. That story tops your first 6 minutes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon DeRate. Gary is off tonight. BNSF railway officials confirmed 21 cars left the tracks during yesterday's derailment near Galena, Illinois. Only 1 car is still burning tonight. The Illinois and National EPA are still on the scene, monitoring air and water. We do know now the oil was shipped from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota. You can see from this video just how explosive the contents of those cars are. KWQC's Mark Stevens is still on the scene tonight. He joins us now live. And Mark, the extent of the fire could be due in part to the type of oil on board.
Yeah, that's correct, Sharon. And as you said, there's only 1 tank car that's left burning. In fact, the fire department stopped putting water on the 3 remaining tank cars earlier this afternoon. 2 of those were able to rupture and burn themselves out, and this last one is the one that they're waiting on. And now, of course, the big questions that everybody is trying to figure out is how safe are these tank cars that are being used? A ball of fire as one of the tank cars spilled its load of Bakken crude during yesterday's accident. It's a scene experts question, saying crude oil shouldn't be this explosive.
So the oil that comes out in Bakken, basically, has a lot more things that you find in, like, natural gas, things like propane and benzene, right, which are a lot lighter than the regular sort of heavy tarry stuff that you have in crude oil.
University of Iowa professor Albert Ratner says those extra products make the oil act like a fizzy pop. When the tank cars or cans get shaken up, the results tend to be more explosive.
And it burns easier, right? So that's something with a very low vapor pressure, so it basically vaporizes easily.
North Dakota has a rule taking effect in April that will require oil producers to take those gases out of the oil, stabilizing it to make it less volatile.
If you take those things out, then the fuel becomes a lot more stable and a lot less flammable. So that's the idea.
But whether it will work is up for debate. A North Dakota environmental group and an oil industry report say the Bakken oil is already under the limit North Dakota set, meaning this oil will still keep coming on rail cars. The tank cars have been under the microscope too. The government is taking steps to toughen the construction standards at the request of the industry.
So it's an improvement. It's a big improvement, right? And there's a new standard, which is DOT 116. And that standard, they're going to start producing those rail cars in about October. And those cars are about 4 times better.
Because the oil and ethanol shipments will continue. A lack of pipelines in North Dakota and around the Quad Cities mean rail is the way for oil and ethanol to travel. And in fact, we did see an ethanol train earlier today. There's actually a set of railroad tracks behind this gate in between the incident command area. And we noticed that ethanol train that was traveling on this open stretch of tracks had the same DOT 111 tank cars that have been called into question because they lacked some of the extra safety precautions built onto them, like those oil train tank cars had, that's now still wrecked. Reporting live in Galena, Mark Stevens, KWQC, TV6 News.
An update now on a story we've been following for you since Thursday when 21 oil tank cars derailed south of Galena. The fire has now been extinguished and cleanup is underway. KWQC's James Stratton was in Galena today. He has the latest.
This was the scene on Thursday afternoon when 21 oil tank cars derailed and 5 caught fire, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. As of this morning, 2 small fires were extinguished by foam and cleanup has begun.
Yesterday was stressful. Thursday was stressful. I didn't even sleep Thursday night with all of the commotion and the worry of what's going on.
Wendy Heiken owns a bed and breakfast just outside of the Central Command Center in downtown Galena. She has seen the derailment response firsthand. More than 120 responders from various agencies have been outside of her house since Thursday night.
Well, as far as I can tell, from my vantage point, it's been very busy. There's been lots of people here, and they were here immediately. I was astounded at how fast they all arrived here, this small city down here in the park below me.
She says she's thankful for the response, but is worried that something like this could happen closer to home.
Fortunately for us, this was about 2.5, 3 miles out of town in a isolated area, but had it happened downtown Galena, downtown Dubuque, downtown just about any community in the United States, it really would have been a disaster of a horrible scale, and people are going to start getting killed.
BNSF Railway says an additional 6 cars have been re-railed and 2 more will be re-railed by the end of the day today and hauled out. They expect the main line of railway to be open for traffic by Monday. In Galena, James Stratton, KWQC, TV6 News.
Rail traffic is open again in Galena after Thursday's derailment and fire. Now that the trains are running again, the oil cleanup begins. KWQC's Courtney Yoon has the latest from Galena.
The EPA tells us today is the first official day of recovery after a train derailment in Galena. City leaders and agencies that responded to the derailment say their takeaway from a disaster like this is the system in place to respond works.
In this instance, if we could get the foam there quicker or have more available to us immediately, that would have probably helped us out immensely.
Over 400 people helped during this derailment. Mutual aid came from 3 states, some over 2 hours away. Galena Fire Chief Randy Beadle says without them, they would not have had enough resources to put out the flames.
For the magnitude of this incident, we were as prepared as we possibly could be.
Here's a look at the derailment site today. The U.S. EPA says the fire is out. Only 1 tanker is still smoking a little, so the cleanup begins.
The contamination that we've detected so far is all in soil. But we need to make sure that that doesn't migrate into the water.
Regional Administrator for the U.S. EPA, Susan Hedman, says they will begin placing booms and building berms to keep the contaminated soil from washing into the river as the snow melts.
As soon as the railroad cars are removed, we'll begin testing the depth and the aerial extent of the contamination in the soil.
In Galena, Courtney Yoon, KWQC, TV6 News.
Today, the first day we were allowed down to the derailment site in Galena, Illinois. It has been 2 weeks since the oil tanker cars went off the tracks there. KWQC's Courtney Yoon was there this morning. Courtney, at this point, they're trying to keep the oil from getting into the river.
Yeah, Gary, you can see here 600 feet of sheet piling erected into a barrier to keep oil in the soil from seeping into the Mississippi River. Beyond that metal wall, you can see there's a triple layer of booms to make sure no contaminants get out into the water. BNSF says so far the EPA has found no contaminants in the air or water so far, but there's a long way to go to get this 2-acre site looking back to the way it was.
New tracks are being put in today along the railroad.
We're eager to get the track back and running 100% after today.
2 weeks following a fiery train derailment in Galena. This is where it happened. The trees charred from the explosion.
And as soon as the site is properly assessed, then we'll know exactly what measures need to be taken for remediation, and we'll have a better idea of how long. We're prepared to do whatever it takes.
Spokesperson for BNSF, Andy Williams, says they are working with the EPA and the Joe Daviess County Emergency Management Agency to clean up and restore the site.
We're building a coffer dam that's 600 feet around the facility. It consists of metal pilings that are pounded into the ground 30 feet or until they hit bedrock.
19,000 gallons of oil water mix has been recovered from the ground. The cofferdam or barrier encompasses the 2-acre derailment site, so no oil that is still in the ground gets into the river. No contaminants have been found in the air or in the water.
You can expect there's going to be oil in the soil. It's just a matter of how far down it went, and we want to make sure that we return this to a natural state.
But it's unknown how long that will take.
The soil that's contaminated will be removed, and probably, soil from other areas that's not contaminated will be brought in.
Crews will dig a 2 to 4 foot trench inside the barrier so they can vacuum out any contaminated runoff water with this truck and pump it over the tracks to an on-site water treatment center.
It'll be sent through a filtering process, and the cleaned water will be returned to the river.